Uhuru, brothers and sisters and comrades, this is Omale Shatella, chairman of the African People's Socialist Party. I am the leader of the Uhuru movement and the International African Revolution. I want to welcome all of you here for today's address. I think it's extremely important that we have this discussion. As you know, yesterday was the day that a lot of attention was given in form of celebration and other kinds of things to the police murder of George Floyd, who was killed in Minneapolis, Minnesota, who was lynched in Minneapolis, Minnesota, by the U.S. domestic military force known as the police department. And that happened on May 25th, a year ago yesterday. And I want to say some things about that and about his death and what it means to us in terms of our ongoing efforts, our ongoing struggle to rectify our relationship with the world and with each other. I want to call on you right now, however, to help with this. Part of what you have to do is you have to like this and you have to share this. You have to get this discussion, this address out before as many people as you can so that we can have an effective discussion, and the discussion can be one that includes a maximum number of African people who need to have an understanding of what the hell is going on and what we are dealing with. So on yesterday was the annual anniversary, the first year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. And this murder, the response to this murder, the response of people watching for 9.5 minutes, this African man being lynched. Millions and millions of people viewed this as his life was snuffed out in a very callous way, again, by the U.S. domestic military force. It's a settler colonial military force, an occupation army that exists inside our community, and people saw it. And it was something that resulted in more than 3,000 protests, more than 10,000 protests, I should say, demonstrations, actually uprisings, including uprisings in a 3-month period from May through August. It resulted in more than 60 countries also having protest demonstrations and in solidarity with the struggle of African people in opposition to what Chauvin did to George Floyd in the streets of Minneapolis. So it was an extraordinarily powerful event, and it was something that continued the process of reinvigoration of a revolutionary movement, a black movement, a struggle of black people that had been militarily crushed by the United States government in the early 70s, late 1960s, and had been pushed nearly certainly out of popular relevance by the government, by all of the minions of the government, by a whole host of opportunists who worked hand in glove with the government for their own benefit at the expense of the freedom of our people. So this is an important discussion because the very same thing that the government was concerned about, and I say the government, I'm talking obviously about the U.S. government, but there were governments connected to the United States government, partners of the United States government, sometimes just satellites of the United States government, connected to the same basic social system that were committing the same kinds of offenses around the world. They collaborated with each other. They sometimes on their own initiative took actions against the struggle of poor people, African people in particular, just to win our freedom, just to win back our happiness, and a return of resources stolen from us for more than 400 or 500 years, leaving us destitute all around the world with no resources of our own as a group, as a collective. And so this thing that the United States government intended to crush with the attack on the Black Revolution of the 1960s. And when they say Black Revolution, I take it beyond the struggle of Black people. I take it beyond what happened with the overthrow and eventual murder of Kwame Nkrumah. I take it beyond what happened with Patrice Lumumba. I take it beyond the 300,000 African people who were killed in Kenya by Mau Mau. I take it beyond just the assassinations of Malcolm and King and members of the Black Panther Party. It was a grotesque assault on the rights of Black people globally, all around the world, people who lived under colonial domination. And I think what I'm speaking of is people who lived under colonial domination. And I could even throw in like the Irish people who in Northern Ireland who were fighting against something like 800 years of British colonialism. So this is what the U.S. government was concerned about. It was concerned about these movements that served to shake up an entire world economy that rested upon the foundation of colonialism. And so all kinds of efforts, murder, brutality, slander, torture, and not just slander and torture, but the exemplary kinds of murder, like butchering Patrice Lumumba, like gunning down Malcolm X in front of his family in a way that was extraordinarily exemplary, and even the killing of Martin Luther King as examples. The way the U.S. CIA and other forces connected to the CIA tracked down, wounded, captured Che Guevara, and then murdered him, and then propped him up and took photos of him. These were to be examples of what happens to you when you try to overturn a colonial social system. And when they did this, when they attacked our real, genuine freedom fighters, those who actually stood up and tried to win our freedom, they raised up a whole different set of neo-colonial forces that were the proper Negroes. These were the ones that the people were told that you should follow. These were the ones who were example of the folly of trying to overturn the social system. This was a part of what we call a counterinsurgency. And we talk about a counterinsurgency because insurgency is what our oppressors, what the colonizers have characterized efforts by the oppressed people, by colonized people, to break out of this stance of subjugation, to take control of our own lives, to overturn our oppression and the system of our oppression. And so they call those movements insurgencies. And this is something that they have to be fearful all the time, because all the time the people want to be free. There's no place on the planet Earth that people who don't want to be free. So all the people want to be free all the time. And sometimes people don't understand, recognize the fact that they are enslaved. But the moment people come to those conclusions, that's because slavery and colonialism is such an ubiquitous force that people grow up in it with the assumption that things have always been like this and can't see anything different, which is one of the reasons our history is always suppressed. But the moment people come to understand that we do not have freedom and have some understanding what freedom could look like, then you cannot, then the people always want to have freedom. And so the U.S. government and every oppressive force in the world has developed this process, this thing, this science that they call counterinsurgency. That is to say, whatever necessary to keep the people from rising up in the first place, and then if the people do rise up, to crush it, to use every method possible to crush it. So that's called counterinsurgency. And counterinsurgency, in the final analysis, is a form of warfare. And it includes virtually every form of warfare. It includes psychological war. It includes economic warfare. It includes ideological warfare. Everything that's necessary to keep a people locked into the system of oppression. And in the final analysis, what it takes is military force. And that's why you see in every colonized community in the world, ongoing military aggression, whether it's coming from something like the United States and the so-called NATO allies and murdering people in Afghanistan, whether it comes from the United States and trying to crush the will of the people in Venezuela who just want to be in control of our lives, or whether it's the puppet regimes in places like Haiti and elsewhere that's been employed and deployed to control the people's aspiration, to frustrate the people's aspiration for freedom. That's what counterinsurgency does. And that's what we have been afflicted by, this counterinsurgency. And that's why when George Floyd was murdered a year ago on yesterday, and we saw in a 3-month period something like 10,000 or more uprisings inside this country, and then people who suffer either the same kind of colonialism or people who are Africans and around the world had something like that in 60 different countries, also had some form of protest, demonstration, and solidarity with the African people in the United States or in opposition to the colonial and neo-colonial regimes that they live under in various parts of the world. That's why this was such a real problem for the U.S. government to see the rise again of the resistance of the people, the struggles of the people to reject this counterinsurgency that has been so effective for more than 3 generations, but been so effective in deflecting the struggles of the people, raising up a whole new sector of the African population of neo-colonial forces who they hold up as representing the freedom of our people, and by virtue of holding them up, they also use them as examples of what's wrong with those of us who would not be satisfied with some kind of pacification, but would demand a total, absolute, unconditional liberation and control of our own lives as any dignified people would require. And so that's what we want. That's why this discussion is so important for all of us, because we have to move beyond the simple kinds of solutions and explanations that's been given to us by our oppressors. And we have to be able to identify those social forces in our own midst who work hand in glove with them to mystify what the hell is happening to us and to do it in their own interest. So here we have today on May 26, 2021, the day after the murder, the year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. The day, in fact, it was on the 26th of May last year that we saw the uprisings and protests began to happen in earnest. And so now the U.S. government, and working with these forces that they have reared in our own communities, have taken struggling to give definition to what is happening. And this is a real contest. This is a real serious thing. This is one of the reasons that I come before you every Wednesday to hold this discussion, because the real question in the final analysis is not how effective demonstrations that we're going to have, or even small uprisings, which are in and of themselves which are important. But the real question is who is going to give direction? What kind of analysis, what kind of leadership is going to be provided for explaining and directing the struggles of our people in the face of the kind of murder that was exemplified by George Floyd? And we have to have that explanation. And the oppressors have to get involved in this discussion with us. I mean, if you look at the fact that there have been hundreds of Africans who have been killed by police since the murder of George Floyd. You're talking about something the police are killing more than 1,000 people every year in this country, more than 1,000 people. And so that number grows higher on some occasions, but that's what we are living with on a daily basis. So it's a problem that we have with a system. And that's one of the things that we have to look at. And that's one of the reasons we have to examine how this anniversary of the murder of George Floyd is being looked at. Because what we have is that the Floyd family, invited to the White House by Joe Biden, who is the president at this moment, even though it's a contested president. And I say contested because there's a sector of the white population in this country who reject the fact that he is supposed to be the president. They are determined that Donald Trump, the previous president, is the one who should be occupying that office in the White House. I'm not debating that with you, but what I'm saying, it is a contested presidency. And it's one that African people, most likely inside the United States, lean toward support for Biden presidency versus a Trump presidency because of what Trump appear to represent in terms of oppression, aggression against African people, violence against many people around the world and inside the United States, on the one hand. But on the other hand, when you talk about the murder of George Floyd, when you talk about the murder by domestic military police forces inside the United States of 1,000 people at least since Floyd was killed, hundreds of them being African people, when you talk about that, you're talking about Joe Biden. It was Joe Biden who created the so-called omnibus crime bill that put more than 100,000 policemen in the streets of this country, pandering to the same white nationalist sentiments that attacked the Capitol on January 6th of this year, pandering to those same anti-African sentiments that happened there, that he put this more than 100,000 police, and they have been killers because that's what they're there for. And this is something that must be understood. It's not a matter of training. It's not a matter of them not knowing that quote unquote Black Lives Matter, because Black lives do not matter. And that's just an objective truth. And what matters is our having the power to protect Black lives so that Black lives can matter, because without that, Black lives don't matter. And now you have Biden, who bears more responsibility than any living human being for the fact that 1 out of every 8 persons in a prison in the world is an African in the United States. And now he is proposing some kind of legislation. He is greeting the family of George Floyd, his 7-year-old lovely daughter, who is saying something and being quoted as this wonderful, this kindly, this beautiful little girl who says, "My daddy changed the world." And so this is what we're looking at. So Biden, the mass murderer, no less than Trump, carrying on some of the same wars against the peoples of the world, no less than Trump. Even if they change some of the tactical approaches to the question, Biden is the president of the United States of a government, which is the largest terrorist organization and most successful imperialist and terrorist organization in the world. And so they go to see Biden, and Biden greets them, and there's a lot of fanfare, and Nancy Pelosi is there, and Kamala Harris, the so-called vice president, is involved in this tour, this process of parading the Floyd family around. And they're talking about how they are reforming the police. They've even got something they characterize as some kind of George Floyd policing act, the so-called policing act of that's supposed to rectify the relationship that we have with this country. And so they have this. Do you have along with them is Crump, is Benjamin Crump, the lawyer. And Benjamin Crump is somebody who is the go-to lawyer for any person who has been victimized and where there's money to be made. Because the fact of the matter is that there's a whole industry associated with murdering Black people. And so what you find is that Crump has sort of got a monopoly on it. It's almost like hitting the lottery. Every time an African is murdered, especially in an obviously grotesque way, and especially in a way that appears to violate the colonial laws in some fashion or another, then you're going to see Crump. And you're going to see Al Sharpton, one of them. They work in tandem, and there are others among them. So all of them come in. They advise the victims' parents and families. And sometimes if the victims survive, they advise them to respect, to talk in ways that respect the law and to anticipate justice that can happen in America. They advise them not to say anything that is categorically opposed to the police or to America, anything like that. And then you have people who have lived in pure obscurity for most of their lives, and sometimes poverty as the working class. And what happens is they fall into the grips of these opportunists who would take them and then parade them around the world. And they don't just parade them just to get money, but they parade them in a way that helps to support the system itself by making sure that they don't say anything that denounces the system, making sure that they don't say anything that would inflame and incite the masses of African people who are opposed to what's happening, and making sure they don't say anything that would incite the masses of people globally who are looking at this country, that is to say, the United States, in dismay because of it. In fact, we've seen that in certain countries around the world, American embassies have put up George Floyd kinds of flags. And when you got something like 60 countries where people are protesting against America because of the murder of Africans, when you got the United States involved in this contest for influence and resources with China and with Russia, and increasingly with other forces like even Iran and even forces like Turkey, who is telling the United States, you can't tell us exactly what to do all the time or in absolute terms. When you see this kind of thing happening, then the U.S. has to show the world how wonderful it is, and what a better way to do it. What better way to do it than to get this 7-year-old child of George Floyd, who walks around talking about my daddy changed the world, and to talk about some kind of reform police act that Biden and Kamala Harris and Pelosi are putting forth to the Congress. And this is what it is that we're looking at. And these are not actions and efforts that will help African people, because the fact is we live under colonial domination. I'm saying, and I'm going to continue to say it, and you must understand this if you don't understand anything else. And colonialism is not just a bad attitude. It's certainly not some racism that they would have you hooked on, to think that you're fighting against the attitudes and the fact that white people don't like you. White people do not control the colonial capitalist state apparatus, this apparatus of organized repression, the monopoly of violence that's used against African and other oppressed peoples around the world to maintain the status quo, not white individuals. There's a state, there's a system, it's a colonialism, it's a colonial system. That is a system that came into existence through enslaving Black people. And it's built all kinds of structures and things like that to facilitate that. Every idea, every attitude, every aspirations of white people on the planet Earth is connected to the maintenance of this colonial capitalist system. Every dream that they have of happiness for themselves and for their children relies on the ongoing existence of the colonial capitalist system. It relies on the murder of George Floyd, even if they don't like seeing it when it happens, even if they don't like seeing what the state does in their names. It requires that. That's why they keep giving the police all the resources. They give them millions and millions of dollars coming from local state or city governments. And that's not something that I'm saying, something that does not dismiss the so-called defund the police thing. Because you can talk about defunding the police. Can you defund colonialism? The police organization of colonial, foreign, and alien state power that's been imposed on Black people. And they call it the police. In many instances in the United States, but a lot of times it's called National Guards. A lot of times, depending on where they're deployed and how they're deployed, they call Marines. They have called Air Force. They are terrorist organizations of extreme violence that's imposed on the people. They're the United Nations. They're NATO. They're all these instruments that's used to control the world as it is, to control the colonial setup. That's what we're up against. And so when they killed George Floyd, it wasn't just an individual, because there's no evidence that they even knew who it was when they killed him. They knew he was an African. And by virtue of being an African, they knew he was a colonial subject. He was the other. That's built into the consciousness and to the system itself of this country. So they murdered him. And since that time, it's been more than 1,000 people who have been murdered, hundreds of them Africans. More of them, in addition to Africans, you've got so-called the Mexican people. You've got other indigenous people who've been killed in this way by this military force, because it's a force that was created for the purpose of controlling a colonial population. That's locally, that's globally, that's what we're looking at. And that's why we see so much resistance and struggle happening around the world. I want to say that it's not inconsequential that George Floyd was murdered on May 25th. May 25th is the anniversary of the organization of the founding of the Organization of African Unity. And although the Organization of African Unity was something that was created to frustrate the ability of the efforts by Kwame Nkrumah, who was the first president of independent Ghana, but even before and independent of that was someone who worked all of his life to try to unite the struggle of Black people on the continent of Africa and globally. So even though the Organization of African Unity on May 24th and 25th, even though that meeting happened to deflect the work of Kwame Nkrumah to unite all of Africa, and it resulted in this neo-colonial, this Afro-continental-wide neo-colonial entity called the Organization of African Unity. On that day, May 25th, it was declared to be an African Liberation Day by Africans who were there, and it has been accepted as such by Africans from around the world. I ran into African Liberation Day in 1972 myself. As a consequence, well, not earlier than 1972, but in the early 70s, late 60s, as a consequence of an African who lived in the United States, but who had gone and was in Mozambique when our people were fighting against Portuguese colonialism in Mozambique, and he wanted to know what he could do, Africans in the United States could do, and they suggested that he come back to the United States and organize around African Liberation Day that was declared on May 25th, 1964. And what he was supposed 63, and what he was supposed to do was use this and win other Africans here in the United States and various places around the world in the Caribbean and the rest of that to raise funds, to put out the word about the struggle of African people and to raise funds for the liberation struggles. And he did that. And I was a part of that process. So we have this African Liberation Day coming on May 25th. And it's the day that this is the anniversary, George Floyd was killed on the anniversary of that act. And I think that's a statement about just the global significance of the struggle of Black people, because Black people globally have been involved historically in trying to end this oppression. That's what Marcus Garvey and the Universal Negro Improvement Association was all about. That's what Malcolm X talked about. That's what Nkrumah and Lumumba talked. That's what the best of those representatives of our people talked about. It was a global struggle. We always recognized that, and that African people were not free. And African people were not free in part because Portugal attacked Africa 600 years in 1415 and began this process of dispersing African people around the world that created a new social system, a whole new world economy based on colonial domination of Africa and expanding to involve the colonial domination of other peoples around the world, where all these resources coming from Africa, coming from Asia, coming from what we now know as the Americas, going to Europe and making the white people in Europe and the colonizers rich at our expense. And then they created institutions to maintain this relationship. So you had a whole political economy. You had whole structures that spanned the globe to maintain this relationship, and that have been tweaked and perfected over the centuries, so that you do have a United Nations after the League of Nations didn't pan out, so that you do have a NATO, so that you do have these world trade organizations and other things like that to connect the whole world into the domination of U.S. imperial and white power. That's what it's all about. So this struggle that African people have been involved in, that was well represented by Marcus Garvey. We saw it also well represented by other revolutionary forces, Malcolm and Nkrumah and Lumumba and others in various places around the world, and like Sobukwe. It was represented even more recently by people like Thomas Sankara, just people who recognize that we are one people and that we have to be free as a people. And so when you see George Floyd killed, you know that Portugal played a role in 1415 when they started this process of selling Black people. And you know that he was killed in a territory that has been settled by invaders who took the land, of the indigenous people here as a part of the overall global colonial project. And so now they settled here. They took the land. They even fought the white people of England, who they were supposed to be sending these resources that they were stealing here back to them. They found that it was a lucrative venture, and they decided to keep it all themselves. And so they fought the British and said that we are taking this for ourselves. And they said, you're taxing us, and we're paying you taxes, and we're not even representing the government in Britain. Well, hell, the indigenous people whose land was stolen, they killed so many indigenous people that they actually changed the climate of the planet Earth. So that there was a little ice age by 1600 as a consequence of 56 million indigenous people being killed throughout the Americas. And similarly, we saw that happening to Africa and other places around the world. This is where this whole thing comes from. This is what the murder of George Floyd is a part of that whole process of policing the colonized of the world. It's not about George Floyd as such, except that he was a colonial victim, and perhaps, and hopefully, and this is the struggle you and I are involved in right now, the definition of what happened there. Hopefully, in the struggle to that, and part of the basis of my talking to you right now is to capture the definition and the direction and to provide the scientific analysis that will arm us, that will inform us of what it takes to be free. Not just to modify colonialism, not just to make a better life on the plantation. That's not what we are fighting for, and that's not what the majority of the people need or want. And it's our responsibility, because I talked to you about what happened on May 25th in 1963. I talked to you about what happened on May 25th in 2020, but on May 25th in 1972, at that first, as a part of the process of building for the first African Liberation Day mobilization that happened inside the United States, there was born the African People's Socialist Party. So even as this counterinsurgency was attacking us, even as they were involved in assassinating Black people all around the world, even after they had overthrown Nkrumah in the same year that they would murder him, even after they had murdered Malcolm X and Patrice Lumumba, and after they had committed all of these horrible offenses against the people of the world, rising up out of the ashes of that was the African People's Socialist Party, with the objective of completing that revolution that was starting there. Not to fight for Black Lives Matter, some nonsense. You don't even fight for that. That's nothing to even fight for. You just say that, and anybody can say it. Not to say Black Lives Matter, but to create an actual process of taking our freedom back for ourselves, so that George Floyd's 7-year-old child will not be lying when she said, "My daddy changed the world." Her daddy would have changed the world because he was a member of the African working class. And the African working class finally has its own revolutionary organization to fight for power over our lives, and to take that struggle away from the opportunists who would treat every death of every Black person by one of these colonizers as a way to make money for themselves and to support the system that oppresses us all. You must join the African People's Socialist Party. You must support the African People's Socialist Party if you can't join. And if you can't support it publicly, you must support it privately. And so what I'm saying is, go to apspuhuru.org. We must win. When we talk about the issue of George Floyd, we're talking about African liberation. We're talking about the people have to have our own revolutionary party to destroy colonialism forever, so that African people globally be able to walk in dignity and in unity and solidarity with all the other oppressed peoples of the world. Uhuru, apspuhuru.org. Is it off?